The next installment in our series on RuneQuest is a little magical. One of the great things about RuneQuest is how many options there are for magic. And as I'm preparing for this campaign, I get to keep thinking about what kinds of magic do I want to have in it. Which of the different options will serve the types of stories I'm interested in being a part of, and which will be evocative of the type of fantasy I'm going for, and honestly, which will have the easiest accessibility for new players. Of the options, the two that immediately leap out at me are, of course, theism and sorcery. It's really hard to imagine at this point a fantasy setting where deities are as important as I have previously described them as being, not having some kind of theistic tradition of invoking the powers of these deities. And it's also hard to imagine going into a fantasy game willingly if there aren't any wizards of any kind. So those two things are definitely in. But the other options, which of these should be included? We have animism, spirit magic. We have mysticism, which is kind of like what you'd expect in a Shaolin monk kind of martial arts movie, or not unlike the Jedi. And we have folk magic. I find folk magic intriguing, and I'm really looking forward to incorporating it in the game as well. Because this is the sort of thing that really brings a fantasy world such as I've been describing, where science really is such a minor influence that it wouldn't be at all unlikely that individuals all across the globe have been taught these incantations or chants or good luck activities or preventive activities, all designed to give them an edge. And for many people these are just habits or superstitions, but for those with just the right kind of training or with just the right kind of power, they actually affect the world around them. I also like the folk magic because it's aimed at being everyday magic. Having experience with a freeform magic system is a great advantage when you're setting down to undertake a project like this, and especially in something like Mage the Ascension, or what I've been doing recently, playing All for One Regime Diabolique with its very interesting magical traditions. How do the effects manifest themselves? So in terms of sorcery, mechanically it's quite simple, and I won't be getting into the mechanics in this video. But the caster will have to fulfill some requirements, they'll have to meet certain mechanical obligations, and they'll need to succeed on a roll or series of rolls in order to get something done. My job at this point is to make sure that that plain mechanical process can be carried out to create drama, supply tension, and that cool factor that we like to play fantasy for. The easy part, of course, is choosing the styles of magic. How to employ these mechanically is all laid out for you, and it's just a decision of will it or will it not be in the game. But what they don't flesh out for you, which you get the freedom and the pleasure of deciding for yourself, is how these things will manifest in-game. Recently, Bolt Orange did a video called Hyper Simulation. And in that clip, he talked about this very thing. How do the mechanics manifest themselves in the game, and how is it possible to have the mechanics manifest themselves in the game without ever stepping outside of in-character dialogue, or stepping out of in-character dialogue rarely. And a great example of this has always been magic. And if you're in a position to start a game like RuneQuest, where You're given just the mechanics, the spell lists, and an understanding of the spiritual and mystical and metaphysical underpinnings of the art, let's say for sorcery, for example. Where you go with it is entirely up to you. What spell components you might require, or what locations might aid or hamper conjurations or enchantments, that sort of thing. It's heady stuff. So I find choices like these really interesting. Like, for example, in one brand of fantasy you might have all of the power for magic being drawn from the individual. So if they know the right words of power and the right mystical gestures and are carrying the right components, they can work magic. Or, as in mage, if they simply have the awareness and the force of will to work magic, they can bend reality to their desires. But in a lot of the classic fantasy campaigns, magic is much harder to control than this, and often comes with a price. So one of the choices that I'm able to make in this game is to go the mage route, where they're simply will workers, or the maybe classic D&D route with spell components, incantations, memorization, that sort of thing. But I can also go to the point where, in order to work magic, characters must be in a certain place, at a certain time, under a certain alignment of stars, with the right knowledge and this mystical energy source, mana, or this energy, ley lines, you name it. And imagine how this decision affects stories further down the line. If you don't have flashbang wizards who can simply walk around, point and shoot magic when they need it, where they need it, if instead it becomes a race against time to get to a particular place in order to work an incantation, in order to have some kind of effect to save the day, the drama and the tension in the story comes from entirely different places and often will require a lot more teamwork and interaction. So I'm leaning that way for this particular fantasy campaign, because I've always played it the other way. I wanted instantly accessible magic. Well, I think this time we're going to try it where magic needs to be taken out on a couple of dates first before you get anywhere hot and fiery.